Good morning. How's everybody doing? I'm fine. I'm fine. Yeah. We're gonna work on the I'm fine part a little bit, right? So this morning, if you've been with us for a while, or if you're first time with us, we're in our third installment of our series. I'm fine. Actually, we were supposed to. Mike and I were talking this morning. We're supposed to launch into a new series next week, but I think we're gonna kind of maybe wrap this one up and put a bow on it next Sunday. So stick with us if you would. If at the end of today you're like, man, that just didn't end well. You're right. It'll end well next week. Okay, so just give us another week to kind of tie this together. But let me just share with you some of the things we've been learning along this 3-week journey to this point. And 2 weeks ago, Mike kicked off this series with this powerful idea, and I know I keep putting this in front of you guys, but I think it's important for us to understand the truth behind this, right? The true principle behind this. The idea that it's impossible to empathize with another's emotions if we don't know our own. Right? And I know a lot of times we put words on a screen, we read words on a screen, and then we kind of go, is that really true? But just think about it for just a second. It's going to be really, really difficult to kind of connect emotionally with someone if you're not aware of your own emotion. It's going to be really difficult to read and to respond appropriately to somebody else's emotions if you're not aware of your own. It makes it really difficult. We talked a little bit about this in our life group Wednesday night, that we were talking about, you've probably known people that are just kind of emotionally, I don't know what the right word is, detached. I don't want to call it emotionally aloof, because that always comes across as kind of arrogant, but kind of emotionally detached. And it's hard. It's hard for them to connect emotionally because they're kind of emotionally detached from kind of everything, themselves included. And so we talked a little bit about that this idea, it's about intentionally knowing and understanding our own hearts so that we can better know and understand someone else's. And I think this is something that I think has gone missing to a large degree in our culture. Is I'd rather spew my opinion than really understand my own heart and try to understand somebody else's, even somebody else that may look at things differently than you do. What an important thing this is. This is about graciousness and kindness, right? The reality is, if we will not make ourselves available to deal with our own emotions, we will rarely be emotionally available to anybody else. If we won't do the work to kind of be emotionally available to ourselves to kind of figure out what we're going through, it's going to be really difficult for us to be emotionally available to anyone else. Here, one of the key thoughts that kind of launched this series out a couple of weeks ago was this, and I just want to put this back in front of you because I think this is a powerful thought. You're only as healthy as you are honest. Seem reasonable? Seems like a pretty reasonable statement, right? You and your relationships are only as healthy as they are honest. You and your relationships are only as emotionally healthy as they are emotionally honest. There's a lot of people who are in a relationship who don't have emotional honesty in their relationships. They don't share deep stuff. They just kind of plod through the relationship and wonder, well, why aren't we really connected? Because you're not really honest, right? No one wins when emotional struggles are buried and not dealt with appropriately. No one wins. The person that doesn't know how to deal with it, or the people around them either. No one wins in that arrangement, right? King David, who went through a season of unhealthy emotional habits. We talked about that last week, right? He finds himself alone. I think he's detached, he's lonely, he's feeling unneeded or unwanted or unappreciated, and because of all this emotion, he starts making these unhealthy decisions, and the whole thing is just kind of this avalanche of poor decision making and poor outcomes, right? So he goes through this season, but he ultimately would face his choices and deal with his emotions, and then he would write these are actually the words that David would write after being confronted by a guy named Nathan, who was a prophet, who said, oh, by the way, let me tell you a story, David, about a guy who had some sheep, but he took his neighbor's sheep and killed it and slaughtered it. What do you think about that? David's like, that's horrible. That person should be strung up. That's terrible. And Nathan in the King James says, thou art the man. You the man. Not in a good way. Not like, you the man. No, you're the guy. You're the one. And on the heels of that, coming face to face with not only his decisions, but kind of his emotional state, he would write these powerful and these piercing words in Psalm 51, verse 6. He says this, he says, "Behold, you, God, delight in," or desire is one of the other versions, "desire truth in the inward being." Here, I always love this verse because the thing that I think sometimes we think is that somehow by admitting what we're feeling and what we're wrestling with and what we're dealing with, that somehow we're shining light on it for God. He knows already. You're not revealing something deep in you that he doesn't know already. But what he wants us to understand is that it's a healthy thing and it's a helpful thing for us to be honest with ourselves to God and with ourselves about ourselves. Does that make sense? That that's a helpful thing. It's a healthy thing. Otherwise, you will live your life pretending as if everything's just fine. David had lived a season of his life pretending as if everything was fine, and it wasn't fine. His emotional outbursts and his emotional decisions were a telltale sign that it wasn't fine. There's something wrong here. And fortunately, there was someone bold enough and brave enough that loved him enough to step in front of him and say, "Hey, David, you've got an issue, and you need to get this resolved." With this kind of serving as a bit of a backdrop, I want to jump into today's talk. And as we do, I want to share just a conversation that I had recently with a friend. And I was talking with a friend of mine, and we were talking a little bit. And you guys that are parents, you've done this. If you have kids that are grown or are kind of on that cusp of being fully grown, you have those conversations with people that are probably in your stage of life or maybe maybe a step ahead of you about just how fast time goes, right? When you're raising kids, it's just, your parents told you this and you thought you're crazy. And then you have your own children and you realize, oh my goodness, it goes so fast. And we were talking about this, and one of the comments he made, and I thought it was an interesting comment, he said, "You know what, I'm never gonna see my 25-year-old son as that 11-year-old again. And I'm never gonna see that 20-year-old daughter as that 6-year-old again. Those times have gone." And I never thought about that. Like, it really got me like, dude, we're having like a dude conversation, and you're ruining the vibe here. Like you're starting to get misty, and I'm starting to get misty, and I don't know if I should offer a tissue to a guy. Like, that just seems awkward. Like, would you? But as I thought about it, I thought, you know what? Carrie and I, my wife and I, are at a point where we realize here pretty soon, there's no more kind of driving the kids to the football games and dropping them off and taking them to the friends' birthday parties and carting them around to concert choirs and sporting events. We've walked through that already. Yeah, some of you celebrate that, which that just means you're a bad parent, so don't worry. No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm teasing. I'm totally teasing. Totally teasing. I mean, that was for Karen as she was exiting and raising her hands to, yay, no more children cart around. But there's a point. We've walked through that with our oldest daughter, Caitlin, but we're going to be walking through that sooner rather than later with Cameron. And man, the thought of it, I have these pictures in my office of like these different seasons of life. And it happens fast. Faster than I realized, faster than I wanted, right? And as I reflected on this conversation, I realized that many of the deep emotions that most of us struggle with are connected to this: loss. That in a way, as we were sharing this, we were talking about the loss of our children's childhood. In a sense. And in a very real sense, we were experiencing the emotion attached to loss. And I believe that's a healthy thing to do. I think that's a healthy thing to do, to be able to experience the emotion attached to loss. Because if I don't experience that, and I don't feel that, and I don't deal with that, and if I don't deal with it well, guess what will happen? I'll treat my adult children like they're little children. I just won't move out of that behavior, of that mindset. I'll just continue to treat them like they're little kids. Or every time they come over, we'll pull out the photo album and we'll show all the home movies, which is okay to a point, but if you do that all the time, that's unhealthy. Just so you know. Like, some of you are like, what do you mean? Like, stop it. Like, your kids won't tell you, I'll tell you. Stop it. Don't quit pulling out the photo album of the baby baths, and that's not, like, only if they're about to get married and you want to embarrass them before their wedding. Just pull out all the dumb pictures, right? But it's kind of a thing that we have to be aware of. And here's the thing that I've become really kind of convinced of. Some of our most unhealthy emotional habits are attached to our unhealthy processes of dealing with loss. And I know that's a mouthful. It's a lot to kind of try to bend your mind around. But I think that a lot of our unhealthy emotional kind of habits are attached to our unhealthy processes of dealing with loss. Many of the emotions that we struggle with live near the cemetery of loss in our lives. And here's the thing, it's not always the loss of someone. Sometimes it's the loss of something. That somehow in this, we haven't taken the time to really deal with and really process the loss of maybe an opportunity or a dream or a relationship or what we thought life would look like or should look like from our perspective, that's no longer what's going to happen. And for some reason, we just haven't really faced and dealt with the loss of that. And what I've noticed and what I believe we all have to pay attention to is this, that change always includes loss. It always includes loss. Change always includes loss, no matter what it is. Even if you look at, hey, this is a good change, there's still loss in this somewhere, somehow. Whenever we encounter change in our lives, there's always something lost in the process, and loss gives us the opportunity to grieve. So here's the idea. Change always includes loss, and here's something in our culture we don't really get. Loss always needs to be grieved, and we don't get that in our culture. That's not something that, if you go to Eastern cultures, they kind of get this. They understand grief. They understand how to grieve losses. But in our Western culture, you man up. Talked about that last week. You man up. Suck it up, buttercup, put your big boy pants on, move on, right? Somehow we've lost the ability to grieve our losses. And the problem is, very few of us have been taught how to grieve or allowed ourselves the time and the space to grieve. How many of you have ever felt that? Like you've been in the middle of something and maybe you've lost an opportunity or you lost the job or maybe you lost someone. And in those moments, there's grief, but it's like, hey, I'm work, 8 o'clock Monday morning. On we go. And it's kind of like we just push through this stuff. Many of us have grown up with the idea that grief is just something we go through when someone dies or when we've lost someone. But let me just share with you again, grief isn't just relegated to the loss of someone. It's also needful when we've lost something. There again, a dream, a job, an opportunity, a relationship, what could have been or what we have convinced ourselves should have been, right? Because we all do this. We're all human. We all have these ideas of this is what life should look like. And here's a weird thing, and we won't talk about that a whole lot today, but I think we have come up with a really skewed version of what life is supposed to look like. And it's skewed to our Western sensibilities that says everything should be perfect and fine. And I should have money in the bank, and there should never be any problems. And I'm reading through the Bible going, where in the world did we ever come up with this idea? That like I'm supposed to have 2.5 children and picket fences and, what? Like I cannot read any of that. That doesn't show up in any of God's word. But somehow in our Western belief, we believe we should have money, everything should be fine, we should have perfect health, we have to have perfect teeth and perfect children and whatever. And it's like that's nowhere in Scripture. And I'll be honest with you, I would love to spend a little more time kind of deprogramming ourselves a little bit. Going, I don't know why you believe that. Because all you're doing is you're setting yourself up for disappointment. Here's the way my life should look. How many of you have the life that looks exactly the way you think it should be looking right now? Yeah, because you don't know what it should look like. That's why you have the one you should have. Like I've just given up. Yeah, not in like given up, resigned to a fatalistic idea, but given up in like, I'm going to just trust that God's going to give me the life He wants me to have. There's an idea. There's a thought. Yeah, I don't know. That's totally for free, guys. That's nowhere in my sermon notes. Throughout our lives, here's what does happen. We all pick up a way to grieve. We all learn a way to grieve. We all learn a way to handle and process loss. Many of us were taught that the way to deal with loss was this way. Here's a way. Bury the feelings, replace the losses, and move on because time heals everything. That's a way to deal. Let's just bury the feelings, Let's replace the losses, whatever that was, and move on because time heals everything. Here's the thing I'm learning. That doesn't work. And some of us have lived our entire lives handling loss and handling disappointment this way. And I'm telling you right now, it doesn't work. And you're like, well, it's worked so far. You're emotionally detached, probably. I'm not going to diagnose you, but I'm just saying, I think if you dig down, right? Because here's the thing. Burying the feelings doesn't actually deal with the feelings. It just pushes them away until they show up again, and they often show up in ways that are completely unhealthy. That's what burying the feelings does. Well, I'm feeling this, but I don't want to feel this, so I'll just push it away, I'll bury it, I'll forget it, I'll just replace the losses, I'll distract myself, and then time will just heal everything. But you know that if you do that, that stuff works its way back up into your life somewhere, somehow, through some tragic event or through whatever it may be. You have this meltdown, and all of a sudden, all this stuff comes flooding back, and it comes back in unhealthy ways. When we fail to properly grieve our loss, and instead we bury our feelings and try to replace the loss or distract ourselves from the loss, we often replace or distract ourselves in unhealthy ways. And I had to write this part down because I want us to understand. So we are people, or we have been people, or we know the stories of people who have tried to fix what was broken in them or fill what was lost from them, and they fixed it or filled it with alcohol or work or drugs or sex or compulsive shopping or compulsive eating or whatever it is, a host of other things that these other attitudes and activities that when you get down to the bottom of it, all of it is traced back to the fact that you didn't deal with loss in a healthy way. That all of these things were things to fill back in the loss that you had, and you didn't take the time and didn't know how to grieve it and deal with it in a healthy way. Just like failing to pay attention to our physical health has consequences, so does failing to pay attention to our emotional health. Here's, you guys just, and you probably know this, so this isn't news. Do you know what the number 2 killer is in the United States of people between the ages of 10 and 34? No one wants to say it. Suicide. Number 2 killer in our nation of people between the ages of 10 and 34. Something's wrong, y'all. Like, we're losing a generation of young people because we haven't done a good job as adults to help them figure out how to deal with emotional health. And I'm pointing to us older generation, right? I'm picking on you. If you're above the age of 34, you're a culprit in this. Because you've had loss in your life and you just buried the feelings, replaced the losses, and moved on. Because time heals everything. And you know it's not true. But that's what we pass to the next generation. And they're smart enough to go, you know what? This doesn't work. This isn't working. And I'm sinking in this. Remember what we said last week? We said we reap what we sow, but we didn't stop there, right? Because Scripture bears out a bigger principle than just you reap what you sow. We like that one. Well, it's my bad, it's on me. No. See, Scripture bears out a bigger principle. The principle is not only do you reap what you sow, but others reap what you sow. See, Scripture bears that out, that it's not just affecting you. It affects others as well. Here's something we need to understand. Everyone around you will eventually feel what you fail to grieve. And I know you guys, this is like, I asked prayer in our life group a couple weeks ago for this series because, man, I'm walking through some of this stuff going, oh my gosh, what a mess. And the easiest thing to do is to pretend like there's no mess, fill the mess with other stuff that distracts me, and then just believe that time's going to heal everything, and I'll be 60 years old, and I'll lose my mind, and I won't care anyway. But hopefully I lose my mind way after 60, but I'm getting close already. So, but that's not a healthy way to deal with stuff. If you fail to grieve, if you avoid grieving, it will eventually have a serious negative effect on your relationships. And here's why this is so important. Now, here's why I felt like Mike and I, when we sat down and we began praying about this and seeking God's direction in the series, here's why I believed it was so important. Because I think all of us want to be, good students and good employees and good employers and good spouses and good parents and good friends and all these kinds of things. But your ability to have meaningful relationships is contingent upon your ability to have healthy emotional habits. Your ability to have meaningful relationships that have some depth and some substance and some solid stuff there is contingent upon our ability to have healthy emotional habits. Otherwise, you know what we'll have? A bunch of pretending. We'll just pretend like we're all fine. How you doing? Fine. How about you? I'm fine. How are you? I'm finer than you're fine. I'm fine. And we have all these weird superficial relationships and wonder, why isn't anything of depth happening to me? Because we haven't figured out how to be people of depth. When we fail to have emotional or healthy emotional habits, especially around the area of grief, here's what we're doing, you guys, and I know you know this. We're just carrying emotional baggage from our past into our present, and we understand it's going to affect our future. If I haven't figured out how to deal with the loss here and grieve the loss well here, I'm just going to drag it along into my present relationships, and it will eventually show up in my future. It just will. And what we end up finding out is this. The later we choose to deal with our emotions, the greater the consequences. In other words, later problems become greater problems. The longer you wait to deal with the emotions surrounding those deep losses and those deep disappointments, the longer you wait, the longer those emotions have to negatively impact your life. And not just your life, other people's lives. Because what you fail to grieve, others will feel. So what do we do about this, right? So that's the real question. Last week, we talked about implementing some healthy emotional habits. Do you remember some of these? We'll just push through these really quick, just quick reminders. Here's some things to do. Here's some action steps. Let your feelings into the car, but don't let them drive. Be aware of what you're feeling. I was watching one guy in particular. I thought it was pretty awesome. His comment was, "Hey, God gave you feelings so you can feel them. Feel your feelings." Right? So that's part of the reason God gave those to us. Pay attention to your feelings. Last week, we looked at John 11:33 and 35, where it says that Jesus was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And then he did what? He wept. And I'm not saying, hey, from here, everybody should just go home and have a good cry. I'm not saying that. That may not be your process. I don't know. But what I'm saying is you better find a process by which you allow yourself to be deeply moved, and you allow yourself to express whatever that is. Jesus' example helps us understand that we shouldn't try to bury or avoid our feelings. Jesus didn't go, I know I lost a friend, I know everybody else is upset, but hey, hang on. I'm the Son of God, none of this can touch me. And here's the thing, I think I pointed this out last week, but I think it's good to recognize. Jesus knew he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead. He already knew ahead of time that was going to happen. Yet in this moment of time, in this moment of space, he allows himself to feel and to express. And I think by that example, he's given us permission to do the same. Grieving our losses is necessary to maintaining emotional health, right? With that verse we read in Psalm 51:6. It says that God delights in and desires truth and honesty from us. He wants truth from you. Honestly identify how you're feeling and do the work to determine why you're feeling that way. To me, that's one of the biggest pause buttons we could ever push. Stuff happens in our day and in our life and in our week or whatever it may be, and all of a sudden we feel anxious or we feel angry or we feel frustrated or we feel sad, whatever it is. One of the best habits you can get into is press pause and go, why am I feeling this way? I shared with you last week, one of the best questions Carrie asked me a few weeks ago was, hey, what's going on with you? That was a good question because it made me stop and go, I don't know. My first response again was, what's wrong with you? But after I swallowed that idea, I stepped back and went, I don't know. I don't know why I'm so kind of frustrated and edgy today. But it took some time to sort through it, and you know what? I prayed about this, and God pointed me in some stuff. Said, hey, you know what? You didn't deal with this well. You didn't deal with that well. You didn't deal with this well. You were really edgy and snappy there. And I had like a list of things that like, man, that all just contributed to a kind of an edgy week. Don't allow your feelings to drive your perspective or determine your decisions. All right? We talk about this in our life group. How many of you have emotional decisions you've made and you're like, those were the best decisions I've ever made in my life? How many of you made like fantastic emotional decisions? Nobody, right? Nobody. We don't make fantastic emotional decisions. I think about it, especially from the financial side of things. Don't make financial decisions from emotion, right? Because you will talk yourself into stuff that you don't even have business. You like a year later, you're selling it for $0.25, and you're like, why did I have to have this thing a year ago? Emotions are good. God has wired us with emotions. They serve a purpose. They're good indicators. When that stuff flares up, it's a good indicator something's wrong. Like when you're feeling this way, there's something going on in you. Press pause, right? They're good indicators, but they're lousy navigators. Here's one of the verses that we looked at last week and said this: since we are living by the Spirit, speaking to believers, speaking to Christians, let us follow the Spirit's leading in every part of our lives. Don't follow your emotions. Don't trust your heart, right? I've heard people say, I just got to trust my heart. You better not. Jeremiah says the heart is deceitfully wicked above everything else. He's like, your emotions are going to mess with you. Follow the Spirit's leadership, right? Here's another one that we talked about last week. Maintain an ongoing dialogue with healthy people. Seek out spiritually healthy and wise people to talk with who will listen to you, who will process life with you, and will pray with you. Not just, I'll pray for you, pat you on the back, hang up the phone, but will actually pray with you, right? Solomon says it this way. He says, walk with the wise and become wise, associate with fools and get in trouble. Just great, like, tweetable wisdom from the book of Proverbs, right? Here we go. Prioritize feedback from others over your own assessment. We are the last to see our own emotional blind spots. That's why they're called blind spots. So make sure you have people in your life that you can trust to tell you what you need to hear instead of what you want to hear. Because we like to surround ourselves with yes people. I want everybody to just affirm my decisions. We need people in our life that goes, your decisions are not good. You're not, that's not a good decision. That they're willing and they love us enough to kind of point that out and say it, right? Proverbs 27, verse 6, the first part of that verse says, faithful are the wounds of a friend. We typically don't look at it that way, but God tells us that's true. When they're willing to say something and speak into your life, something that you didn't want to hear but you needed to hear, that's a faithful wound. That's a good wound. That's an ouch that will steer you in a better direction, right? And then briefly, and we're going to dig into this one a little bit, we talked about the need to implement the emotional, kind of that healthy emotional habit of inviting God into the process. And here's where I want us to dig in for the last just few minutes here. I want to take you to one of the most profound and popular psalms in the Bible, right? And it's a psalm that we hear read at funerals, we hear it read in weddings, because it's a psalm filled with hope. And I want us to look at one verse right in the middle of Psalm 23. And David would begin this psalm praising God for his care and his leading in his life, right? You guys have probably all heard this. Maybe you even memorized it. You can quote it. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Or in other words, I have everything I need. One of the versions quotes it that way. The Lord is my shepherd, I have everything I need. Well, David, why do you have everything you need? Because the Lord is my shepherd. He says, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the right paths for his name's sake. And what's interesting is right in the middle of this psalm, David writes about moments in life that require grieving. Right in the middle of this, like this all sounds, it's green pastures and still waters and soul restoration, and this is awesome. And David's like, yeah, hang on just a second. It's not always awesome. Even though I walk through the valley, and this version says of deep darkness. Even though I walk through the valley of deep darkness. And the reality is, and it's a reality that we all know, but sometimes we need to be reminded of, is that there will be valleys of deep darkness in our lives. There will be. There again, in our Western sensibility and Western thinking, we believe that we should be able to avoid every deep, dark valley. And nowhere in God's word is that said or promised or even warned about. Jesus doesn't say, hey, in this life, you're going to have a grand old time, and everything will work out great. Unicorns, lollipops, balloons, and bubble gum. This is amazing. You're a follower of mine. Your life will be perfect. No, he says, in this life, you will have what? Trouble, tribulation. But be of good cheer. Be of good cheer, right? Even though I walk through the valley of deep darkness, we need to understand, and we need to grab a hold of the fact that you and I, as followers of Jesus, as believers in Jesus Christ, you and I were not given a pass to the valleys of deep darkness. You weren't given a pass. You were given a hope, and you were given a future, but you weren't given a pass. We don't get to go around or over or under or avoid these valleys. God says through the pen of David that these valleys of deep darkness are valleys we are going to have to go through. And here's the thing. Some of you may be in a dark valley right now. Like as we're talking about this, like even the words feel deep and dark because that's where you're at. Or some of you may be exiting that valley. But the worst thing you can do when you're trying to navigate through a dark valley is to pretend as if there's no dark valley. You ever done that? How many of you ever had one of those things where maybe it's a new environment, maybe you were traveling, you stayed in a hotel, or maybe it was one of those things where you were traveling, you got back, and your significant other, your spouse, changed the furniture around in the house. Anybody ever had that happen? And it's like pitch black in your house or in your hotel room, and you're dead tired, and you get up in the middle of the night to find your way to the restroom, whatever it may be, and you just pretend as if everything is just perfectly fine and lit up, and you just like walk with all the, like, and before you know it, it doesn't help you from a safety standpoint to pretend like it's not dark. It's okay to understand and recognize, hey, this is a dark valley. This isn't a walk in the park. This is a deep valley. This is a dark valley. And the bad news is you have to go through it. That's the bad news. But here, what's so cool about this is that David's not done writing. Even though I walk through the valley of deep darkness, watch this, I will fear no evil. David says, even though I have to walk through it, I will not let fear paralyze me in it. Even though I have to walk through the deep, dark valley, I will not allow fear to cause me to camp out in it permanently. Not going to do it. I will not fear. I will fear no evil. And the profound thing to me is the thought that the dark valley is really a lot about loss. The dark valleys, the deep, dark valleys we find ourselves in often have loss attached to it. It's the loss of someone or something. And in the middle of the loss is where fear steps in and it starts to whisper, well, now what are you going to do? Now that you've lost that. Now what are you going to do? Now that you've lost that job, that person, that future, that dream, that plan, now what are you going to do? So much of fear is rooted in loss. Fear shows up and it says, oh no, now what? That's when I listen and I talk with people and I even kind of look at my own struggle, that's where I end up landing. It's that fear of the future. I believe fear plays on our future. It's the, oh no, what now? Oh no, I've lost the job. What now? Oh no, I've lost that stable, person. Oh no, what now? I've lost that relationship. I've lost that opportunity. How am I going to pay for it now? Or how am I going to make it now? What am I going to do now that I'm alone? How am I going to find a job now? What does this change mean for me now that I've experienced this loss? And David lets us know that you and I don't have to be afraid. We do not have to fear the uncertainties of life. And I believe that's where fear often roots down in us. It's not even about what you're going through this moment. It's about, oh no, now what? Now what's going to happen? Now how are we going to make that payment? Now how are we going to overcome that challenge? And I know some of us are thinking, you know, David, I hear what you're saying, but the way I deal with the deep, dark valley is I just avoid it. No, you don't. No, you don't, because none of us are given a pass. David says, I want you to know that you can go through. You'll have to go through the dark valley, but you don't have to be afraid. Do you see the difference? You're going to go through. That's not optional. It's going to happen. Throughout God's word, he continues to lay that out for us. But here's what he says. He says, you're going to go through it, but you don't have to be afraid in the middle of it. Even though I walk through the valley of deep darkness, I will fear no evil. Why? For you, God, are with me. Wait a second. I'm not walking through this deep, dark valley all by myself? No, you're not. He says he's with us. He's holding us and guiding us. And I believe that some of us are trying to avoid the dark valley of dealing with loss because we don't know if we can hold up to it. I think when you push in and go, hey, what are you, I just don't know if I'm going to be able to hold up to it. I don't know if I'm going to be able to face it if I have to face it. And you know what the reality is, you guys? You're probably right. You probably wouldn't hold up well if it was just you. But it's not just you. That's what he's saying. Even though I walk through the valley of deep darkness, I will fear no evil because I have my ducks in a row and I have the strategy. No, he says, because God, you're with me. Because I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but I believe you're holding the future. And beyond that, you're holding me. And you told me we're going through. That's powerful. What if you knew your Father in heaven was with you? What would it look like if you walked through the valley not alone, but with your heavenly Father by your side? All of the things that you can't control, what if you knew he was the one in control of everything? What if I quit trying to avoid the valley and I understood I had to walk through it, but I didn't have to walk through it alone? What if you knew that God was the one who was graciously and faithfully holding you as you walk through this dark valley? What if I paid less attention to the dark valley and paid more attention to the faithful God of the valley? What if I started doing that? This is what got David through his valley. And I'm going to be honest with you guys. This is the only thing God offers you to take you through yours. And it's not a program. It's not a 12-step program. It's the protector and the provider and the helper and the guide and the shepherd that is our God. He says the only thing you need to go through this dark valley is, God tells us, it's me. You need me. And that's what I'm offering you. That's what I'm extending to you. You see, when we are walking through our dark valley, what we don't need are catchy cliches and snappy slogans. What I don't need, what you don't need, is platitudes and pep talks. And I know people are well-meaning. Like, they come on, hey, you can do it. Really? Because I'm about to choke you. Can I do that? Like, that's cool. No, I don't need a pep talk. I don't need platitudes. I don't need empty slogans and pats on the back. I'm praying for you. You know what we need? We need a God who walks through the dark valley with us. That's what we need. And David concludes this stanza with this thought: your rod and your staff, they what? They comfort me. I don't know much about raising sheep, but I just don't think the sheep and the rod and the staff have a real good relationship. I don't know. I've seen the rod and the staff used, and it's usually not for really good things. But David helps us understand this, right? He lets us know that our journey through the dark valley will come with God's protection, the rod. That also gets used on predators. And God's prodding, the staff. They'll use the hook to pull that sheep back, or they'll poke it along to get it moving. But here's the thing, while he promises that we'll have God's protection and we'll have God's prodding, David also lets us know that our journey through that dark valley is going to come with some pain. There's going to be pain involved. There's going to be pain as a part of that process. David doesn't say that our walk through the dark valley is going to be pain-free and comfortable. And I think, there again, back to our Western sensibility, we believe that somehow I'm in the dark valley and I'm going to just skate right through this thing and no problems at all. And it's like, why in the world do we have this misconception of what it means to walk through a dark valley? Because David says there's a rod and a staff involved. There's going to be some pain in this process. What he does tell us, though, is you can go through it. You can go through it, and that God will get us to where he wants us to be. Why? Because he is our shepherd. That's what he's doing. And I know it doesn't feel like it. You're like, well, I'm just in the dark valley. Maybe, but God says, I'm taking you through it. He's going to walk us through whatever that is. This is why, knowing that the Lord is our shepherd and that he promises us that we are not going through our valleys alone, it's why we can walk through the valley of deep darkness. It's also why we don't have to make a choice to set up camp and stay permanently. That's not what that verse says. Even though I descend into the valley of deep darkness and set up permanent housing here, it's not what it says. And I know you feel like, well, you're just poking at stuff that's hard. Trust me, of all the people that has a little bit of an understanding of how hard it is, I get it. But I also know that when I quit staring at my deep, dark valley and I start understanding the faithfulness of my good shepherd, I understand this is through. This is not into forever and ever, amen. This is through it. How do we know? How do we know if there's some loss in our life that we haven't taken the time or given ourselves the space to grieve? How do we know that, man, you know what, I don't know, I'm not sure what it is. I don't know if there's something there that I just got to wrestle with. And here's the thing, please understand what I'm not saying. I'm not saying go home today and start, dreaming up stuff to be grieved over. Okay, that's not what I'm saying. Please don't do that, because you're going to cost yourself and your counselor a lot of time and money. All right, don't start just I'm just gonna when I was 2 and my little froggy died, and maybe that's part of it. Maybe you started to learn how to deal with loss. Maybe that's where it began for you. That hey, you buried the feelings, you got a new froggy, and you just moved on. Maybe that is something you have to deal with. But I'm not saying to go and just kind of dig into stuff that's maybe not even there. What I am saying is there's some clues that there's some stuff we may need to wrestle with and deal with. And one way that might be a clue to us that there's some emotional baggage that we need to unpack is this. Here's one way: emotional edginess and or emotional avoidance. Right? If you kind of live your life in perpetual emotional edginess, there might be something there that you need to deal with. And by emotional edginess, here's what I mean by that. You give a dollar's response to a 50-cent problem. Does that make sense? That these little things happen, and it's constantly met with overreactive emotion. Can I point out something real quick for us? If that happens, and you're married, and your spouse responds like a dollar's response to a 50-cent problem, it's not a good time to say, hey, I think there's some stuff in your life you need to grieve. I'm just letting you know, that's not a good moment, right? Don't say that. And don't tell them I told you could say that, because then I'm coming for you. But maybe there's an opportunity to ask a question. I was reminded of Carrie's question to me a couple weeks ago. Is there something else going on? I saw what happened, but I saw your reaction to it. Is there something more to this than what I'm aware of? Maybe that's a great question to ask. You know why that's a good question? Because I don't want to be told I have an issue. I want to discover that I have an issue. And you do too, right? That's humans. We're humans. I don't want somebody going, you're all jacked up. I know that. I just got to figure out what sort of jacked up I am. I'm trying to figure it out. Get off me. No, I'm just kidding. That seems like $1's response to a 50-cent problem. Yeah, but we want to discover some of that stuff. That, you know what? Carrie asked me the question, what's going on with you? Press pause, and for the next couple hours of the day, I'm like, I've just been really edgy. I don't even know what's going on this week. And I started to back up through it, and I spent 2 days without stopping to pray. And that's a habit for me. I get up in the morning and I have time with God and in His Word, and I'm praying for people. And there was a couple days I got up, I had stuff, I had to go, and on we go. And I'm not blaming it all on that, but I'm saying it certainly factored into my less than peaceful response. So emotional edginess, that might be a clue that there's some stuff that you just need to back up and deal with. Here's the other one. Emotional avoidance, right? We avoid deep or difficult conversations. You ever know those people? Ever been those people? Where somebody kind of presses in, they ask a question that kind of pushes below the surface, and you're like, oh, how about them Brewers, or whatever. You're just you backpedal from it. You avoid deep or difficult conversations. We keep from having quiet time or contemplative time in prayer. You avoid it. That I'm not just going to quiet myself for a moment because maybe I'm afraid of being alone with my thoughts for a moment. Or I'm afraid of what God may point out as I'm quiet with Him for a moment. We build a wall or busy ourselves in order to avoid our emotions. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about emotional avoidance. We build a wall, pretend like there's no emotion there, we're not going to deal with it, not going to talk about it, or we just busy ourselves. I'll just move from thing to thing to thing to thing, and I won't actually pause long enough to consider what may be going on. Either one of these or both of these could be a sign that we haven't grieved the loss or given ourselves and our loss completely over to God, the one who knows us, loves us, and has promised that He's working all things together for our good and His glory. I'll be honest with you, we wrestle with more stuff because we fail to really see it and go, here, God, you take this. I love Sister Dottie. One of her favorite things she says, give it to God. And it sounds a little cliche, but there's truth to that you know what? If I'll stop bearing the burden of it and I'll exchange my heavy burden for the burden that God offers to me, it's an incredible exchange, guys. I get rid of all the heavy stuff, and He gives me a yoke that is easy and a burden that's light, He said. Let me just share with you, this isn't a quick prayer and a shrugging off of our loss and the emotion attached to it. It's not I gave it to God. It's an intentional, maybe a moment by moment, hour by hour, day by day, walking through the valley. It's a moment by moment, hour by hour, day by day, surrendering of our lives and our loss to our good shepherd. I don't know about anybody else, but when I think about giving it to God, I am the world's worst of going, here, God, oh, by the way, I'll take that back. Let me just drag that along for another week or 2, month or year or decade. This is intentional, moment by moment, day by day, hour by hour, walking through the valley, surrendering our lives and our loss to the Good Shepherd. We're going to wrap up. Let me just summarize real quick what our healthy emotional habits may look like and what it may look like if we gave ourselves some space and some time for some good grief, right? You remember Charlie Brown? Good grief. There is such a thing as good grief, right? And here's what I want you to know. I want you to know, first and foremost, and I think you've got this if you've been here for a while or you just heard me this morning, but this is stuff I've been struggling with, okay? So I don't have it all figured out. Still trying to figure it out. Still trying to sort through the mess that is me of sorts. But I also know that there's some of you guys that have been struggling with this too. And I know it's not easy, but I know it's worth it. And some of you have been teetering between emotional edginess and emotional avoidance for quite a while, and your life and your relationships are buckling under the weight of it. Because you're sitting on either emotional edginess, I'm ready to have a meltdown any moment, or emotional avoidance. I don't want to talk about it, don't want to think about it, don't want to pray about it. You're riding the seesaw, and it's wearing you down. And I know you know this, and this isn't to pile on guilt, it's just to make you aware that the things that you fail to grieve, others are going to feel. You don't just reap what you sow, others reap what you sow. And if we're not handling that stuff well, it's going to rain down on other people's lives and in other relationships that we have. So I want to encourage you to try a new approach, right? Here's the old approach. Bury the feelings, replace the losses, move on, time heals everything. This one doesn't work. What if we tried this approach instead? What if instead of burying our feelings, we actually felt our feelings and expressed them? Here's part of the reason life groups exist. And let's be honest. This is part of the reason life groups exist. It's to give us a place and a people that we can sit down with and sort through some of our stuff and have people who are lovingly concerned and willing to pray with us and help us sort through the things we're dealing with and walking through and what it feels like. Instead of replacing our losses, what if we took the time to review our loss? What if you actually paused for a moment and went, you know what? I've never really considered why that left me so frustrated. I've never really considered why that left me so bitter or jealous or sad or angry, or whatever. Here's the thing that I've learned. Until you identify it, it will own you. Until you're able to say, you know what? That thing has just been eating at me for weeks, for months, for years, for decades. My entire childhood, this thing has been eating at me. And I've never stopped and identified it and said, you know what, it's that. You know, one of the most amazing things in the story of David when he was young, when he kind of comes on the scene and everybody now knows who David is. Do you remember that story? Remember what he did? He fought a giant. What was that giant's name? Yeah, he named his giant. He knew the name of his giant. He knew what he was up against. And I think sometimes we struggle through life because we've never taken the time to figure out what is it that I'm really battling? What is it that I'm really up against? What is it that has just been churning within me, that loss? And maybe for some of you, it's nothing you could have done different. It affected you, but it really didn't have anything to do with you. It was an adult in your life who made a decision that you were the victim of, and you've wrestled with this the rest of your life. And I'm telling you right now, you can walk through it. It doesn't have to own you. Unless you want it to. Unless you've become so accustomed to that place that you're afraid of what it might look like if you walked out of it. Finally, instead of believing that time will heal everything because it doesn't, what if we invited God to heal the wounds of our loss? What if we were just brutally honest like David was and said, you know what? God, I need you to step into my life. I need your healing. I need your direction. I need a shepherd that will lead me into green pasture and still water, and I need a shepherd that will restore my soul. I don't need snappy slogans and pep talks. I need a Jesus. I need a God that loves me and walks through this valley with me. Here's the truth that I'm coming to face with, and I don't know, maybe you can identify with this. At least in my life, it doesn't seem like God will heal what I'm not willing to admit to him I feel. It's hard for him to step in and heal anything I will not intentionally hand to him. He wants me to. That's why he said he desires and delights in truth in the inward part. Why? Because he wants to know. No, because he wants me to know how it's affecting me and what it's doing to me in my relationships. And he says, you know what I need you to do? I need you to give that to me. I need you to be aware of it. I need you to identify it. And I need you to hand it over to me, because at that point, now I can start to heal what you have refused to feel up until this moment. I believe we get to know God on a deeper level when we invite him into these scenarios where we get to understand him and know him as healer and provider and savior. I will never know God to that level if I won't admit I need healing because I'm broken, and I need saving because it's all messed up, and I need provision because I can't do this on my own. Here's what I'm hoping you understand. God does not want your "I'm fine" response. He doesn't want it. And that's where we want to go. We want to go there with each other. We want to go there with ourselves. And to a certain degree, you want to go there with God. And he says, you know what? I can't heal it if you won't admit you're feeling this. If you won't admit to yourself that you're struggling with this, I can't help you here. He desires and he delights in truth. He promises to walk with us through our dark valleys. But in order to do that, you have to stop pretending or avoiding your dark valley. Here's our thought, right? We kind of started this way earlier. You're only as healthy as you are honest. And here's what I'm learning. You can stand on a church stage every Sunday and not be healthy because you refuse to be honest. And you could try to live a life of pretense, but at some point, you guys, that whole house of cards comes caving in. And at some point, you have to deal with the fact that you're broken. And it's in that very moment, with the heartbreaking and maybe even tears running down your face, where you reach out and you call on the one who can bring healing, that healing begins. And I just want to encourage you. Healing starts when you're honest. Health begins when you're honest. And I'm gonna do this. Mike, would you mind? I asked Mike, we're gonna do something a little bit different this morning. I know you want to get out of here, and some of you guys are like, I've got a trunk to decorate. I've got to go. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. I want us to just take a moment. And I know this may be really, really uncomfortable for some of you guys, because you're like, I don't like just quiet. That's why I invited Mike up here. It won't be just quiet. But I'm kind of wondering, maybe if nothing else, just a moment and just some time and just some space between just you and God. Maybe there's some stuff that you're like, you know what, God? It's been a month. It's been 6 months. It's been a year. It's been a decade of just carrying this weight. And God, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to want to hand it to you today because I'm feeling like I should, but I know I'm going to want to pick it up again. But God, I need you to step in and help me heal. And I want to just give us an opportunity to do that this morning. You may need to pray. I don't know if you can come up here and pray. You can grab a friend and pray. You can sit right where you're at and pray. What I will ask you to do is don't leave. And you're like, man, I got to decorate a trunk, and if I don't get to McDonald's, everybody's going to beat me. Can you just for a moment, if it's not you wrestling with some stuff, it's somebody else. So please don't ruin this moment for them, okay? But I'm just going to ask you to close your eyes for a minute. And I just want you to be incredibly honest with a God that already knows you, but wants you to know you and where you're struggling. So I'm going to give you a minute just to quietly sit. If you want to come up and pray up front, you're more than welcome. If you want me to pray with you, I'd be more than happy to do that. Whatever you need in this moment, we want to give you an opportunity to do that. So eyes closed, heads bowed if you would. We're going to have Mike just play a little bit. bearing with me these last years. Thank you for holding me up, praying me along. Father God, we're so grateful. We're so grateful that you're a God that promises to shepherd us, that promises to watch and protect and guide. And God, we know that isn't always without some pain and some uncomfortableness attached to it. That sometimes we get so stuck in our place, in our ways, in our mindset that we just stream along and don't realize what you're wanting to do in us and how you're wanting us to open our eyes and open our hearts to all that you want to work in us and through us. God, I pray today that if there's somebody here that doesn't know your son, that all of this seems like, man, I should know God this way. That if your spirit is pressing that into their hearts, that today will be the day that they find a new shepherd. That they quit trying to shepherd their own lives and they turn their souls over to the shepherd of their soul. God, I pray for those of us that are Christians and are believers that somehow bought into the idea that life is just going to be fantastic at every turn. That God, help us deprogram from that. Help us understand it's going to be challenging, but you've also promised that it will be good and full and abundant. Help us understand those two things exist with each other. I don't have to be absent of trouble to experience your goodness. Matter of fact, God, it's oftentimes in the trouble that I really get to understand your goodness and your grace and your mercy and your love. So God, help us to be honest with ourselves, with others, with you. And then help us encourage others that may be walking through that dark valley right now. Help us be an encouragement. Help us share their burden.